Hey fearsome friends, tonight you better double lock those doors and windows, because we're exploring the world of break-ins. Maybe you should just check into a hotel instead. I would. From being lured into opening your door, to full-on physical attacks, it seems that your homes actually aren't as secure as you think. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm. Are you scared yet? Keep being creepy. This happened quite a while ago when I was home alone with my dog. After all this time, I still feel that what happened was really strange, and I have no idea what this man actually wanted. So I was watching TV one night, when at about 11 p.m, I heard a car pull up outside and the engine shut off. I figured it must have been a neighbour coming home, but Nosy Dog wanted to have a look and went over to the window. Doing this though, kind of messed the blinds up, so I got up to fix them, and when I did, I noticed a car parked on the street across from my house. My neighbour's house. I couldn't really make out any details of the car, but it looked like the driver was still sitting inside, so I didn't really think anything of it. I got myself a drink and went back to watching TV. Quite a while had passed since I'd fixed the blinds, but I'm not sure exactly how long. I'd guess 15 to 20 minutes. When suddenly out of nowhere, I thought I'd heard a tapping at the door. Not a knock, but a light and very quiet tapping. My dog perked up to look at the door, and I paused the TV. Then the same tapping sound started coming from the window. I opened the blinds a little to see a man standing there. I couldn't make out his face properly, but then he immediately walked back to the door and started tapping there again. I had a really awful feeling, and I felt absolutely terrified. The tapping at the door never stopped, but something in my head was saying that if I opened that door, then something really bad was going to happen. I decided to go upstairs to instead open a window and ask him what he wanted. It felt safe doing it that way. He said in a really quiet voice that he was delivering a pizza and told me how much it cost. I felt so stupid for being frightened and told him that I hadn't ordered pizza. I guess he was speaking quietly and knocking lightly so he didn't disturb my neighbours. My dog had followed me upstairs and was letting out an odd growl bark, which isn't really unusual for him. So I was trying to shush him when the man downstairs told me that he had the correct address to come downstairs now, open the door and pay what I owed before the food got cold. I was really confused, because I most definitely hadn't ordered any food, and again began telling him that. Just then I noticed that he didn't even have a pizza, and was in fact not carrying anything at all. I told him again that he had the wrong address, and he got really angry and kept telling me to open the door. He was going between angry and sort of trying to persuade me to go back downstairs. I asked him where the pizza was, and he said he had a hold of it. It was really dark, but he definitely didn't have anything in his hands, and my dog was really making quite a bit of fuss now, as the stranger had turned into a broken record. Come downstairs, open the door. Come downstairs and open the door. All the noise must have alerted my neighbour, who did open his front door, and the man didn't say a word, but practically ran across the street to the car that I had heard pull up a while ago, and he went back to the car empty-handed. I have no idea what he wanted, but he certainly wasn't a delivery driver. It really freaked me out as well that my dog was quite obviously a large breed, and the man saw him through the window, but wasn't deterred at all. It seems even stranger and less random that he actually drove specifically to my house, as though he'd planned on showing up. I'm a 22-year-old female, but this story took place when I was 20 and had just moved back in with my parents. Now they live in a relatively safe neighbourhood where you don't hear of any crimes more serious than petty theft from unlocked cars. But at this time, my city was experiencing a string of non-violent home invasions. It would start with a homeowner noticing that their garage door opener would go missing from their cars, and within a few days they would wake up to find their house had been robbed and ransacked overnight. It took a couple of weeks and several robberies to occur for our police department to connect the dots between the garage door opener being taken and the house being robbed, to understand that the robbers were only targeting houses with cars parked outside and being left unlocked. While living with my parents, I had to park my car in the street alongside our driveway, as our garage was only big enough to fit 2 cars, my mum and my dad's, and during the summer my mum's car and our boat. My dad would park in the driveway. So this particular night was a Friday and my boyfriend was working late. So my mum and I decided to have a movie night in our living room. Now, to understand the story, I'll explain the layout of my house. We always entered our house through our garage, never our front door. When you walk in through the garage, you walk immediately into our living room, which is connected to our kitchen. To your immediate right is our staircase to our basement. Now it was about midnight when our movie ended, and my mum had been washing towels. Before going to bed, she decided to go downstairs and switch the towels over into the dryer. I stayed on the couch and waited for her to come back up. And as I was waiting, I heard a noise that made me jolt out of my seat. Was that our garage door? I asked myself. I waited and continued listening. I heard the door move all the way up. Before giving it much thought, I ran to the door and locked the deadbolt. The only people with garage door openers to my house were my mum, my dad, and me. We were all in the house. The only other way into the garage was to enter the key code into the pad. But again, the only people that knew the code were my parents, my boyfriend, my brother, who lived a few hours away, and myself. I ran downstairs and asked my mum if she too had heard the garage door. She said she hadn't, but that she also hadn't been listening. She asked if I locked the door, and when I said I had, she shrugged her shoulders and said that we'd assess the damage in the morning if they were to have stolen something from there. She figured it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and no one had opened the garage at all. I wasn't pleased with this answer, and really I was quite unnerved. We went into our rooms and I decided to call my boyfriend. I didn't tell him about the experience, but instead asked him about work. He lived about 3 cities away and worked in the same one. He said he had just closed and picked up some Taco Bell. I told him I missed him and wished he could be here to spend the night with me. We hung up and I turned to Netflix to ease my mind. About 45 minutes later, the lights in my driveway came on. Now these are motion-activated lights, and again that uneasy feeling crept its way into my body. I slowly peeled myself off my bed and made my way to my open window, and out of nowhere, my boyfriend pops up. I covered my mouth and tried to withhold my fear. "Did I get you?" he asked. "You asshole." "Hey, I'm here to spend the night," he said. I was excited and told him to meet me at the front door, as it would be quieter than opening the garage door. "Oh yeah, I was going to ask, why is your garage door still open? And why is the light on?" he said. I was shocked. I rushed to the door to let him in, and we closed the garage door behind him. I then told him what I experienced earlier, and with a determined look on his face, he grabbed our biggest knife and walked around the house upstairs and downstairs, checking every room. But there was no one there. It was 2019 and I lived in a house with 2 other women. We were all in our early 20s and our house backed onto a park. Well, more like an open lot which was accessible through a main road. There was no playground or barbecue area or anything like that, just long thick grass and trees. The back fence to the house I lived in was only waist high, and there was a tree on the right-hand side of it obscuring about half the view over the fence into the park. So one night after I'd showered and got into my undies and a baggy top, as it was summer, I heard the dog in the backyard going absolutely mad. My housemate was not home and it was her dog, so I flew out the back door to see his teeth out snarling towards the fence. He'd caught possums before, so I got concerned that there was one in the tree. I approached him to grab him by his collar and drag him inside, but as I do, I get a shiver and sense that something is not right. The dog was still going mad, and I looked up to a figure of a 5'10" man just standing there in the dark on the other side of the fence and not saying a word. I couldn't see his face, so naturally I jumped and said, "Oh, my goodness, I didn't see you there." Still he said nothing and just stood there wearing a beanie and a jacket, just staring. I used the dog in front of me to back into the house and lock everything up. Then I immediately called my partner to come over. After that, a couple of other things happened over the next month, but nothing significant, like a pop security screen that could have been the wind, or some computer parts on the lawn that could have been children, etc. Then one night at around 10 p.m, after arriving home from a friend's house, we often left the back door open to let the dog come in and out, as the dog was quite intimidating. We never thought anyone would ever get close enough to the house. I know, how naive. So I go to the kitchen, which is next to the back door, which is wide open. I then heard the dog barking in the backyard again. It's not uncommon for him to do this, so I just made myself a drink before going out there to rally him inside. Then I saw a shadow to my right. Yes, inside the damn house. It was rounding the corner from the back door into the kitchen, and I froze and thought to myself, what on earth is this man doing? It's summer and he's in a coat covering his entire neck to his wrists. Panic began to set in, and I backed myself up to the counter to back away from him. Looking down, I see a knife in his hand, and it's our kitchen knife from the block that is behind me, so now I know that he's already been in the house. This can't be a robbery, as he's already been in and had the chance to steal anything he wanted. A scuffle then ensued, and he then pulled the rug from under my feet as I hit my head on the counter. I was unconscious, according to the time of the police call, for up to 5 to 6 minutes. The last thing I remember is the dog barking from behind him, and it turns out that the dog was too scared to attack, but was doing his best to scare him away. The police and detectives arrived, but did nothing, as there was technically no break and enter due to the door being wide open. This also meant it would be difficult to determine what he touched. I also seem to recollect that he was wearing gloves, but couldn't be sure. I did have a defensive slash wound to my hand, and some bruising, but nothing came of it, and they just suggested I move and hope nothing happened again. Now I can't be sure if the man at the fence was the same man, but he was a shadow in the dark who watched the house for sure. We had a third housemate at one point who asked me for a cigarette once because she was stressed and could only handle menthols. I told her I didn't smoke, and she said it must be the other girl. Confused, I said, "Neither of us smoke, what do you mean?" She had been picking up cigarette butts from outside the front and side door for her entire stay. She never said anything because she decided it was something that bothered her, but it was clearly not us, so she didn't mind doing it, as it only bothered herself. She left very early to open up a cafe before either of us girls woke up, which is why we never saw them. When I was growing up, my mother accidentally led me to believe that house break-ins from strangers are incredibly common, and it would probably happen to me at some point. Why? Did you live in an unsafe neighborhood? No. But whenever a solicitor would come to our house, my mother would whisper yell for everyone to hide, and she would creep behind the door so they couldn't see her. In my child brain, this to me meant danger. It took me years to figure out that she just didn't want people soliciting us. I still to this day jump whenever I get a knock at my door because I think it's a murderer. Anyway, on with the story. Hopefully my reaction to this situation makes more sense with that background. I realize how lucky I am to have grown up in a safe neighborhood, though, where crime is virtually non-existent. It was a weekday in 4th grade, and my sister was out and my dad was at work, so it was just Mom and me. I'd just gotten home from school and we were planning to go to Target when we suddenly hear the doorbell ring and a loud banging on the front door. My mum did the typical run and cover thing, and my heart was beating super fast. Eventually the banging stopped and my mum said it was okay to come out, but I was still really scared, so decided to go upstairs to get ready for shopping. Now me, being a scared little anxious 4th grader, decided to make sure that the scary man was gone. My sister's bedroom had a window that was directly above the front door, so I went and peered out, and he was still there sitting on the doorstep. My mum thought he had left because she couldn't see him through the peephole. I was about to crap myself with fear. He was a grungy-looking dude with baggy clothes and a baseball cap pulled over his face. I decided then that I couldn't tell my mum about it, as in my head, if I had, she was going to open up the door, and he would probably murder her. Dramatic, I know, but that's genuinely how I felt. My plan was to not tell my mum, and then when we go to Target, we can just speed away from him so he can't kill us. Man, my 8-year-old brain. So I kind of just sat there in terror and waited for my mum to tell us it was time to go. I remember her offering me food, and I was trying to act normal, but I literally couldn't eat because I was so scared. We finally left, and right when we pulled out of the driveway, of course he was still there. But my mum didn't see him, so I yelled, "Mum, that man is still there!" She then rolled down her window, as I frantically told her not to, and she asked, "Can I help you?" He walked over towards us and didn't say anything, and I swear I thought we were dead in that moment. Then he pulled up his baseball cap and said, "Sarah?" "Sam?" she replied. The man ended up being my mum's long-lost brother. He hadn't been doing well, so he found our address and came looking for my granddad's money from his will. He ended up staying for around a week with us, and it was quite odd. We never really saw him again until a year later, when I'd heard he'd passed away. My family is very hush-hush about these kinds of things, so I don't really know what his deal was, but it sounded sad. The moral of the story, though: parents, please don't make your kids hide when you get a knock on the door, unless you have a legitimate reason to. Or if you do, please explain why. Your kids will grow up to think every knocker is a murderer. I'm a female and in my early 20s, and I moved here alone a couple of years ago. So about 9 months after I'd moved in, it was a little past 11:30 p.m. when someone started pounding at my door. I was already in bed by this point, so hearing this freaked me out to say the least. Now, the night before, my upstairs neighbour's aquarium had broken, causing it to flood into my living room. So as I had just had that fiasco with them late at night, I just figured it was probably her again, and almost opened the door without hesitation. But right before I went to open up, I had this horrid feeling wash over me. So instead, I meekly said through the door, "Hello?" A man replied, "Hi, I'm a friend of David Jones." The second I heard him speak, my blood went cold. I had a terrible feeling about this. David Jones was the name of the previous tenant. He was very elderly and disabled, was in a wheelchair, and had a live-in helper. He'd also passed away before I moved in. I looked out at the peephole and he was wearing sunglasses. Weird, it was almost midnight. A black face mask and a black hoodie with the hood up. "David doesn't live here anymore, I'm sorry," I told him. He pounded his fist on my door again and laughed. "Oh yeah? Open the door and prove it," he said. Like I'd already mentioned, David was in a wheelchair and needed a ramp for the door, which was removed before I'd ever even moved in. I also drive a motorcycle, and my immediate neighbours don't drive any particular wheelchair-accessible vehicles. So with all this in mind, you would think someone who feels comfortable enough with David to be knocking down his door in the middle of the night after at least almost a year of no communication would be able to evaluate the situation and see that there are no wheelchair modifications, apologise for the mix-up, and be on their merry way. But this wasn't the case. He was still pounding at the door and telling me to open up. I told him David was not here. I was not going to open the door, and he needed to leave. He stood outside my place for a few more minutes while I stood on the other side of my door, scared and frozen on the spot. I saw him walk away, but I stayed by my door. I then heard someone rustling around by my back door, over by where my bedroom is. Still frozen, I didn't want to believe that someone could actually be by my bedroom window. Now, for clarification, the area by my window is attached to a common area yard for all the residents. It's directly off the sidewalk of a relatively busy area, so it isn't uncommon to have someone in the yard, but it is certainly uncommon to have someone directly up against your porch and windows. Suddenly I heard a loud noise coming from my bedroom, so I grabbed my pepper spray and cautiously approached the room. Thankfully no one had broken in, but something still seemed really off. After a while I hadn't seen or heard this person anywhere, so I went back to bed. In the morning I went out for a smoke and noticed that my bedroom window screen had been ripped off. It was all bent out of shape and definitely didn't look like it had just randomly fallen off. I knew exactly what had happened to it. That guy had ripped it off and tried to get in through my bedroom window, but thankfully it was locked, and I have window jammers too. This obviously frightened me, but there wasn't much I could do at this point. However, a few weeks later, someone had tried to open my front door again, but in the middle of the day this time. No knocks, no nothing. I just heard my door clearly being tried to be opened. I shot up and ran to the peephole to see a man dressed all in black with hood up and black sunglasses. He tried the door a couple more times and pushed against it really hard. I was trying to think of something intimidating to say or something to get him to stop, but my brain decided that it was a good idea to just hit my door as hard as I could. It worked though. I slapped the back of my door really hard, and the guy jumped up 3 feet and ran away scared. But here is where I think it gets really bizarre. I googled my address. Everything online for my current residence still exists. Still lists a David Jones as the active resident. I 100% think that that guy saw me, a young female all alone, and googled my address and was trying to get my trust into opening the door. But I think after that hadn't worked, he was still trying to get in by trying the bedroom window instead. Him coming back a few weeks later, though, was very weird in my opinion. You would think that he would have either moved on to another target or would have been much more interested in getting in sooner. I definitely don't think that he knew David, though. I don't think he owed him money, or was family, or any of that. So the timeline is bizarre. But maybe he already had other victims and just decided to try my place again. At any rate, his plan didn't work and he was gone. So then literally months upon months go by, when someone gently knocked at my door around 9 p.m. I got up to look, and what do you know? An individual covered in black from head to toe with sunglasses on. I didn't answer or make any noise, so he slowly turned the door handle and pushed on the door. Not being able to get in, he took a few steps back and walks to the neighbor's door to try theirs. My neighbor is a middle-aged man living alone, and the door didn't open either. Then I saw him walk up the stairs and could hear him trying other neighbors' doors. Now this apartment has 5 people living in it, including a child. He was trying every single door in the building and failing. It was so creepy. Now that makes me think that maybe he didn't single me out as a vulnerable female, because he just seems to be trying to get into anywhere. Though I do think it's strange that my cats hate him, as I've never seen either of them hiss, except for when this guy is at my door. They are always clearly very frightened and are ready to fight, which is majorly unlike either of them. You honestly wouldn't even know they had teeth or claws unless you were a cardboard box or a laser pointer. Back in early January, our clad-in-black lad is back. My brother, who looks quite intimidating, was over for a visit, and he heard someone trying to open my door. So he got up and opened it to see this guy actively trying to open my middle-aged neighbor's door. The guy ran for his life, and my brother hadn't been aware that this had been going on, and where he thought it was weird, he wasn't trying to run after this guy either. Today I was taking a nap, and at around 2 p.m, I heard an aggressive knock on my door. It went quiet for a few moments, and then another knock. While this was happening, I heard my upstairs neighbors quickly close their windows. I was tired and figured it was this same creep again, so I didn't even bother looking. After a few minutes, I heard him knocking on my neighbor's door, and after failing that, he went upstairs and knocked on the 2 doors up there for a bit. After a while, the knocking stopped and I heard my upstairs neighbors open their windows back up. I couldn't sleep anymore, so I grabbed my smokes and headed outside. I could hear my neighbors through their open window as the little girl was asking her mum who that guy was and why does he keep doing this. I've known of him bothering them at least twice, but it could have definitely been more. I have reported it to my landlord, but she is absolutely no help, and basically just tells me not to answer the door if I feel unsafe, and to call the police if it escalates. The police don't have a quick enough response time to come out here when it's happening though. I did call them before, and I don't have much of a description for them to go off of, but they basically told me not to open the door if I feel unsafe, and to call them if it escalates. You would think someone ripping my bedroom screen off would count as escalating, but I guess not. This guy has been bothering me for a little over a year now, and apparently my neighbors as well. It seems really weird for a criminal to do what he's doing, trying to break into the same group of apartments over and over again at all hours of the day and night. It's beyond strange, and I just have no idea what he's after. This stranger is harassing my neighbors and I constantly, and none of us even know what he looks like. Don't open your doors to strangers, folks, no matter what time of day it is. This story takes place back in April 2018. I live on Long Island and was in my freshman year of high school. I was going through a tough time at this stage of my life, as earlier in the week, my girlfriend had broken up with me because of rumours that she'd heard about me, which I won't share on this subreddit. But there was a lot of drama going on at this time. Depression, broken hearts, you know, typical high school crap. And my mum, knowing this was all going on, and that I was down in the dumps, one night took me to get a new phone in the nearby mall. We were gone for about an hour and returned home with my dog greeting us. My dog is a short, stocky golden retriever, who's never violent or vicious in any way, and this is important for later. My dad was still at work, so it was my duty to take out the trash. So I went through the front door, with my dog resting on the porch, and went to the side of my house to throw it out. When I was throwing the bag, I looked over to my neighbour's house, where I saw a guy dressed all in black, who was around 6 foot, and was walking out of their side door. Being a paranoid 14-year-old, so many red flags were going off. Now I live in a safe neighbourhood, but not 15 minutes away walking distance, we live by a town that has a high crime rate, ranging from muggings, drug dealings, and even murders from time to time. My neighbours, on the other hand, have an older stepson who drag races in that part of town. So for some stupid reason, I wasn't in fight or flight mode yet, because I was assuming that this could be one of his friends. That is, until there was another man, and then another. There were 6 guys, all dressed in black, coming out of the house from the backyard. It then clicked what was going on, so I tried walking away as if I'd seen nothing. But when I was on my driveway, I saw 2 of the 6 guys slowly walking towards me. My blood went cold within a second as they were getting closer, and my dog shot off running from the porch, chasing the 6 men down the street into the night. My dog came back and I was still standing on my driveway, trying to process what I'd just seen. I went back inside with my mum asking me what had happened, so I told her about the 6 men coming out of the neighbour's house and heading towards me. We called the police immediately, and they came over to ask me some questions. I described the 6 men as best I could, and the police told us that we hadn't been the first to experience this, as there had been 7 burglaries all over town at that time, and I'd probably witnessed them attempting to break in. I told the officers about 2 of the 6 guys starting walking toward me after I'd spotted them, and they explained to me that because I'd seen them, they were going to try to stop a witness. Basically, it was a friendly way of saying that the burglars were going to kill me because I'd caught them in the act. Typically, though, all they could do was fill out a report. I was always afraid of break-ins, but I never thought I would experience one. To this day, I'm still surprised at how my harmless golden retriever saved my life that night, and showed me that no matter where you are in this world, this kind of thing could happen anywhere. 4 years have gone by, and my family now has a gun, and I am currently training in kickboxing for self-defense. When I was 14, I was asked to babysit my 3 younger cousins, aged 8, 4, and 1, in an extremely rural, mountainous part of Pennsylvania, as my aunt and uncle had a wedding to go to over an hour away and wouldn't be back until very late. Their house was situated on a steep mountainside. Their back deck had a 15-foot drop onto a rocky hill below, leading down to a river, and their only neighbours were about a half a mile away. The closest main road was a mile away, and at night there were no lights to be seen anywhere around them. Basically, it was in the middle of nowhere, and you would have to know where you were going to get there. You wouldn't just accidentally come across it. My aunt and uncle left us with some pizza and their cell phone number next to their landline. This was the early 2000s, and I didn't have a cell phone. But even if I did, I wouldn't have gotten a reception there anyway, and they headed out. The baby was already asleep. The 4-year-old wasn't feeling well and was quietly watching TV in the living room as he dozed off. The 8-year-old was playing Guitar Hero with me up in the loft, which overlooked the living room to the left, where I could keep an eye on the 4-year-old, and there was a huge window that overlooked the driveway to the right. Now, this description of the driveway is important to the story. The road that led to their house ran straight into their forked driveway. It was a dead-end road, and the house was as far as you could go. Going to the left driveway, there is a large open carport, and that's where my aunt and uncle, and anyone who ever visited, parked. The right driveway led down to a very short but very steep hill to a large levelled-out area, and ended against the garage door that opened to the basement of the house. It was never used as a garage, but served as my uncle's man cave, where he spent most of his time. Right beside the garage door was a normal door with a window, so you could see right in, but this driveway was exclusively used by the kids as a play area because it was the only flat yard-like area on the property, and being on a mountainside, there isn't much room to safely play otherwise. Now, no cars ever drove down there, ever. There were too many toys and bikes in the way, and friends and family knew this. So it was about 10 p.m, pitch black outside, no moon to illuminate the area either, and my cousin and I were still playing Guitar Hero when headlights caught the corner of my eye, and it wasn't my aunt's minivan headlights, but huge truck headlights with those roof lights you often see on Jeeps or other off-road trucks. Not only that, the truck was going down the right driveway, the kids' play area. So this was definitely not my aunt and uncle, and this was not anyone they knew. Panic and dread filled my body. I was a small teenage girl, alone in an isolated house, on a mountain at night, with 3 children in my care. In a terrified voice, I asked my cousin, "Who is that? Jake, do you know whose that truck is?" And then he looked panicked. "No, I've never seen that truck before," he replied. I quickly ushered him downstairs, still unsure what to do, but the 2 little ones were sleeping down there, and I wanted to make sure they were safe. I checked on the baby and then grabbed the phone to call 911, and then I started to hear the metal garage door being shaken violently. No one ever opened that garage door. More panic filled me. I heard them try the door beside it, the metal doorknob jiggling. No one was even knocking. It's not like they were checking to see if my uncle was down there. Plus, the lights were out. It was dark down there, so they knew no one was down there. They were definitely breaking in, and the door leading to the basement steps was right next to the phone, so I could clearly hear all of this going on. I quickly turned the little lock on the doorknob, just in case they did make it into the basement. My heart was practically jumping out of my chest as I was talking to the 911 dispatcher, as my 8-year-old cousin clung to my arm. The operator was calm and trying to calm me, but I knew it would be at least 30 minutes until a police officer would get up there, assuming they didn't get totally lost on this mountainside in the pitch dark. I just kept thinking, we are dead. This is how I die. The operator asked for the number my aunt and uncle left me, so she could have another dispatcher call them to let them know the situation. But as I turned around to grab the paper with the number on it, to my absolute horror, I saw a man peering into the large sliding glass door. He was a huge, burly, what had to be 6'4" man, with long, scraggly red hair and a big red, bushy beard. And what made it worse was that he was grinning at me, grinning in a way that still scares me to this day. Meanwhile, I had to have looked like a terrified deer in headlights. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Then there was a second man behind him I couldn't see as well, and I have no idea what he looked like, but he was equally as tall, but a bit more lanky than the larger man at the sliding glass door. I screamed, "Oh my God, they're here!" And before the 911 operator could say anything, my 8-year-old cousin goes, "Mr.Jim?" His voice was very confused. It wasn't like my cousin was happy or even relieved to see him. I asked, "You know who that is?" But before my cousin could answer, I turned my attention to the man in the door. "I'm on the phone with the police," I shouted. I'm grateful he didn't try that door, because I don't think it was locked. The man stared at me hard for a moment, eyebrows furrowed, like deciding what he wanted to do next. But he then just backed away into the darkness. And what seemed like an eternity later, I saw the truck lights back out of the driveway and then back down the road until they disappeared. I was still scared out of my wits, and so was my cousin. He had only met that guy a few times, an acquaintance of his dad. It wasn't like he was a close family friend. And obviously, because again he went down the wrong driveway, visitors never go down that way. The 911 operator asked for a description of the man, then told me they'd gotten in touch with my aunt and uncle and they were on their way home. She stayed on the phone with me until a police officer showed up a bit later to make sure the men were gone, and they stayed with us until my aunt and uncle got home so they could ask them some questions. My uncle was furious. Not at me for calling them home early, but at this Mr.Jim guy. He muttered something like, "I'm gonna mess him up." My aunt was mad at my uncle and told him to tell Jim to never come back again. Now I didn't know at the time, but my uncle had a drug problem. I don't know what Mr. Jim or his accomplices were doing, or what they would have done if I wasn't on the phone with the police, but that grin was not a friendly one. It was sinister. And again, he also had to have known my uncle was not there, because the basement was dark. He would have seen through the windowed basement door. He had also tried lifting the garage door, something not even my uncle did. He'd intended to break into the basement, that much is clear to me. There is no other explanation. I never did babysit for them again, and I don't think I ever went back up there, because not long after, my aunt divorced my uncle and moved out. So this happened 2 years ago. It was a normal weekend day, and I happened to be home alone. I went about my business as usual and planned on just chilling and watching some movies for the night. I was used to being home alone, so I wasn't afraid or anything like that. And after all, I would always take precautions, and nothing ever remotely suspicious happened. Until this night, that is. At one point in the day, I decided to take my usual midday walk, and I'd usually have my headphones in. At first, I didn't notice that someone was following me, but at the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a silhouette that was matching my footsteps. The person was walking alongside me on the other side of the pavement, synchronizing their movements with mine whilst watching me. I gathered the courage to face the person, and he was an ordinary-looking man, seemingly in his 40s. There was nothing odd, creepy, or unusual about him, except the look on his face, which was emotionless, stiff, and haunting somehow. I could only bear to look at him for a few seconds, as his glance felt really unsettling. I continued on my walk, turning off my music player in order to be more aware of my surroundings, but I kept my headphones in, as I didn't want to tip him off that something was wrong. Then out of the blue, he turned and started walking towards me. My heart was pounding, but I didn't stop walking. He got close and said something to me. He asked me how my mother was doing. Now, even though a creeping sensation was taking over me at the bizarre question, as I didn't know him, I took my headphones out and asked him to repeat what he'd said. He did so, and I replied that my mum was fine. I then asked him how he knew her, since I'd never seen him before. He evaded the question and said that he hopes her and my grandparents had solved their family issues, which he couldn't have known about, since our family keeps their business private, especially from strangers or extended relatives and acquaintances. My stomach turned as I refused to respond and avoided eye contact with him. It was weird, because I couldn't make out his features very well, as I was determined not to look at him straight in the face. At that point, I began to walk faster, taking a different route back to my house. Very stupidly, I looked behind me and saw him in the same spot, but now he was smiling, and damn, it was creepy. Every inch of my body told me to run, but I refrained, thinking he would be excited by this challenge of chasing me down. I got home and sent my mom a message providing this guy's description, as far as I could tell, to see if she knew him. She didn't reply, but somehow I managed to calm down by the end of the day and watch some movies like I'd planned. By the time I went to bed, I'd almost forgotten about this strange occurrence. That is, until I was awakened by a knock on the door to my flat. I was sleeping in the living room, so I heard it right away. I checked my phone. It was 4 a.m. Who would be banging on the door at this time? An unsettling sensation creeped up on me as I was gathering the courage to look through the peephole in the front door. There was a knock again. I finally got up and pulled the cover off the peephole. And there was that strange man standing with his head very close to the peephole. I can't even describe what a grotesque sight it was. He could see me watching him and smiled. I could make out his features better this time too. He had piercing blue eyes, black greasy hair, and a hooked nose. The best way to describe his face expression, though, was creepy and disturbing, as his large smile didn't go up to his eyes, that remained motionless, and his teeth were really clean and white. He also seemed to be well dressed. He didn't strike me as a homeless man. So me observing him took about 2 seconds, and then he started waving at me while quietly giggling. That sound and the hand gesture pushed me over the edge, and my heart sank. I instinctively pulled away from the door, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, as I didn't own a bat, and also looked for my pepper spray or a taser. I was walking towards the furthest spot in my house from the entrance when I heard the most horrifying sound. He was trying the door handle repeatedly, but I locked it, thank goodness. As I heard this, I called the police and explained the situation as quietly as I could. They said they would send someone, and a good 20 minutes later, as I was holding tight the kitchen knife in anticipation, without daring to look through the peephole again, I knew this guy was still standing at my door. I could hear him breathing, but I didn't flinch. When the sirens emerged in the distance, I let out a sigh of relief, and as they came, the guy had scarpered and was nowhere to be found. I didn't hear them leave, but I was distracted by the sirens, so could have missed it. The police questioned me and I provided the man's description to them. They said they would keep an eye out for him, but I couldn't sleep after that. In the morning, my mum responded to my message that she knew no one who matched the description I gave her. I explained to her what had happened and offered a better description of the man, but she still had no clue. 2 years passed since then, and nothing else came of it. I don't exactly know what his intentions were, and what he knew about my family, but I was paranoid for a while. The police didn't follow it up either. To be honest, it all felt so eerie and surreal that I often think I must have imagined him or something, especially since I never saw him again, and to my knowledge, was never found. Back in 2016, I was living with my then boyfriend's family in their home in Melbourne, Australia. Each morning I would wake up and be the only one home. But on this particular morning, when I woke up, I could hear loud banging and clashing at the back of the house. I decided to ring my boyfriend's mum, just to make sure it was her and it was nothing to worry about. But unfortunately for me, she didn't answer my phone call. Out of curiosity, I peeked through the blinds of my bedroom. My bedroom backed onto the back of the house, and I happened to see the top of someone's head, or what seemed to be a grey beanie. Then just at that moment my phone rang. It was my boyfriend's mum. She wasn't home and wasn't sure what the banging was. I asked her if her daughter could have possibly forgotten her keys and might be trying to get back into the house, but she told me she wasn't too sure. We ended the phone call, and at this point I was a little on edge, as I suffer from anxiety and overthink everything anyway. I decided I might need something to defend myself just in case, and having been in the process of painting my room, I had nothing but a pillow to protect myself with. I decided to have another peek out of the blinds to see what was going on, and as I pulled them open, I was looking straight at a young man dressed all in grey. He looked at me dead in the eyes and smiled, then proceeded to walk back to the back door. At this point I was in full-on panic mode, as the banging was getting more intense, as I knew now that this person was trying to break in and definitely knows I'm here now. What do I do? Firstly, I locked my bedroom door. The banging stopped, and I thought, okay, he's given up. But then I could hear the sliding door that connected to my room roll open slowly. My heart was in my throat as I could feel that I was in some sort of danger. Then my bedroom door handle slowly started to rotate, but thankfully it was locked. Then I heard a female faintly call my name. It was my boyfriend's sister. She'd been home all along. We tentatively together went out to see that this man had very nearly succeeded in entering the house. The door frame was torn off from the wall, and the sliding door was off the tracks. My dog was hiding under the couch too. We called the police and had 2 squads to the house within 3 minutes. The guy was never caught. Then fast forward a couple of weeks later, and my car number plates were stolen. My car was parked in the driveway of the house the day of the attempted break-in, and weeks after, I was followed by a young man in a van. He'd followed me to the petrol station and had made a point of stopping in his car and smiling at me. He even stopped his car in peak hour traffic, just to get a glimpse of me. He'd been hanging around the front of my house, the neighbour's house and street for weeks following the incident. Everything was reported to the police, including his registration, etc., but the plate turned out to be fake. Annoyingly though, nothing ever came from this, and eventually I moved out, bought a new car, and haven't had an issue since. But ultimately, I now have a huge fear of being home alone. So it was a Friday night, and earlier that day my parents had left to go to an important business meeting early Saturday morning. The city where the meeting was taking place was a long way away, so they left early to get there for around 6 p.m. and stay at a hotel. Now I was 15 at the time, and it was back in 2017. I had been left at home to watch my 2 little brothers and my 1 little sister. So we were all watching Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone together, when all of a sudden we heard banging on our back door. I got up to investigate, and I saw a man standing there. Then I noticed 2 men at the kitchen window, and they were all wearing black hoodies. I turned off all the lights and told my siblings to get upstairs as quickly as possible. At this time, one of my brothers was 8, my other brother was 6, and my little sister was 4. I ended it by turning off the living room light before heading upstairs, and as we were doing that, another man approached the front door and started banging on that. So at that point we ran upstairs and hid in my wardrobe. We heard the men make their way upstairs, and I heard one of them say, "We just want to kill you, so there ain't no point hiding." My siblings were starting to sob when we heard two men go into our parents' bedroom. I decided that that was the time to escape. Now, I had lived in this house for my whole life up to that point, so I knew where all the creaking parts of the floor were. I told my siblings where they were too, and to avoid them, and we made it downstairs, and I unlocked the front door for our escape. However, I accidentally swung it open a little too forcefully, and it hit the wall. Turning around, I saw one of the men at the top of the stairs looking at us. He pointed at us and started to scream an alert to his partners. I ran out with my siblings as fast as I could, when I heard the man's screams turn into a high-pitched psychotic laugh. We started running to our neighbor's house, which was a good distance away, and we saw the four men chasing us. Luckily, though, we got there safely, and our neighbors called the police. We waited for the police to arrive, and we went back to our house. The four men were nowhere to be found, and there was nothing else to report, apart from 2 broken door windows. So I'm a security guard for an alarm response company, and we answer alarms for businesses and private residences. 99% of the time, it's a motion detector set off by a cat, or a restaurant forgotten to disarm their stuff before the stock truck arrived to unload. But in this case, I was called out to a house where the back door alarm was set off, like it thought someone had opened it. The owner was out of town, but she was alerted by her app and had her mother meet me there. We checked the door, and it was locked, so we figured that maybe someone had tried the door, but it didn't budge, which then set off the alarm. But there was a light on inside. The mum mentioned this to her daughter on the phone, and her daughter then said that she wasn't sure if she'd left the light on or not, as it's a good idea to make people think someone's home, but she just wasn't sure. That, though, gave me a bad vibe. The mother wanted to go inside to check, but she didn't have a spare key. However, though, the neighbor did, but they were asleep, and Mom didn't want to wake them up. So I filled out my papers and went back to my normal patrol routes, when an hour later, the same home sends out an alert. Now, I'm the only one in my city zone, so I answered it again, and when pulled up, the police and CSI were there talking to the mother and the now awake neighbor. They were reviewing video footage sent to them by the daughter. I took a look at the footage. 4 armed men wearing masks and hoodies came out of the bathroom a minute after the mother and I had left. They then proceeded to rob the place after having broken in and locked the door behind them for appearances. They're the ones who turned on the light. The mother told me that the 3 guys had robbed her daughter's home a month before too, and somehow they knew when she would be out of town and made their move. They appeared smart, desiring a quiet robbery without conflict, but they'd brought guns, so they were obviously prepared to shoot their way out of trouble if needs be. The mother had wanted to go in originally. If she'd had a key, or had awoken the neighbor for one, we would have likely been shot dead by these guys when we entered the house. And unfortunately, work doesn't give me a Kevlar vest or anything like that. If I ever get another house call and someone is there, I am not going inside, no matter what is asked of me. I count myself fortunate that the way was blocked this time, because I was prepared to foolishly go in and check if I could. The 1% of the calls where something is actually off, it has never been as bad as this one. To really understand what happened, you need to know a few things. I live in Belgium, And at the time of this story, which was in 2018, I lived at home with my parents, my older brother, and my sister and my sweet dog. Although looking back, maybe my dog is a bit too sweet. Also important to note is that my family is always busy doing something or other. Everyone has a very different rhythm, and some days it's like we just live next to each other rather than with each other. So that's why at the time I didn't really know who was home and who wasn't. So this particular time in 2018, it was a school night, and I woke up to some noises in my room. Confused, I looked at my phone, and it was around 3 a.m. You know that feeling when you wake up very abruptly and don't know if you're dreaming or not? That was kind of how I felt. Now there's a streetlight right outside my window, so even though the curtains were closed, I could still make out some silhouettes in my room. As I had just woken up and wasn't thinking clearly, I thought that one silhouette I could see was my older brother. I was sleep drunk, as it can be called, and I started asking him what he was doing, but he didn't really react. I saw him walking towards my jewelry, so I asked him again what he was doing. But again, my brother didn't respond. I was still laying in bed, and I began to feel angry because I had school the next day and had to get up early. And as you do with irritating siblings, I started to curse him out. "Get out, I've got school tomorrow." This time he looked at me, but again didn't say anything. He then walked towards my handbag and started rummaging through it and taking things out. At this point I was just angry at my brother, and finally got out of bed. The lights were still off, and I walked towards him and asked him again, "What are you doing? Get out!" As I began pushing him slightly towards the door, finally he spoke. "Where's the money? Where's the money?" he said, in a very strange, almost fake accent. And quite honestly, I was laughing it off, as I still thought it was my brother. "Okay, I don't know if you're drunk or just being an asshole, but seriously, get out." By this time we were almost at the door, as I was still pushing him out. He left and I closed the door. Finally, I had a chance to think about what had just happened as I went back to bed, and I started to feel unsettled. I got nervous and scared as I was thinking it over. Didn't I smell cigarettes? But he doesn't smoke. And why would he act so strangely? Just to be sure, I texted my brother. "Where are you?" I asked him. His reply made my heart sink to my knees. "I just left the gym, home in a minute." I immediately called him and frantically explained that there was just someone in my room. I started crying and was panicking, asking him what to do. He said to call the police and to stay in my room, and as the gym was really close to our home, my brother was home in literally a minute or two. I was still upstairs on the phone with the police when I heard my brother yelling, "Get out!" At that point I was in the upstairs hallway, because my sister had woken up and was wondering what all the commotion was. My father had fallen asleep downstairs on the couch, so when he heard my brother scream, he immediately woke up and knew something was wrong. He went to the downstairs hallway and saw my brother chasing the intruder. They were now at the front door, and my brother managed to take a backpack from the intruder, but sadly he got away and fled. My brother thankfully got a good look at him though. The police came and I was in shock. All this time my mother was asleep because she's on strong sleep meds. She woke up during the chase when my sister and I were standing in the hallway. I was crying and she came to us as I frantically told her what was going on. She then said, "Ah, little one, it was just a very bad dream." We still laugh about that today. While we were talking to the police, we had to describe the person. I told them exactly what had happened and how he looked, and due to the streetlight outside my bedroom window, I could see the clothes that he was wearing. He had a hood up, so I didn't see his face, and when I was close to him, he always turned his back towards me. So I'm telling the police lady about his black pants and green hoodie. when she abruptly stopped me. "Green? Your brother said light grey." That's the second time my heart dropped to my knees. That means there must have been 2 guys, not 1. Both my brother and I were 100% sure about what we saw, so there had to have been 2 guys. They'd taken a few iPads, phones and wallets, but luckily my brother took the backpack where there was a lot more valuable things that they didn't get away with. But the burglars were kind of stupid, because we still had Find My on all our Apple devices, and they were still running. A day later we found the location as to where our stuff was, so my brother jumped in his car with my father while on the phone with the police. My brother is such a badass, going to the gym at night, in the military, chasing an intruder through the house. I wouldn't mess with him. They waited for the police, who then went into the house where the location of our devices were, and they found 1 guy. He was crying and covered in his own piss and puke. They arrested him and he confessed. He said he was high on drugs, and it was the first time he'd ever done something like that. He panicked and cried the whole time. My brother recognized him as the intruder that he chased out, so that meant the guy that was in my room was still out there. The drugged up guy snitched on the other one, but he was nowhere to be found. We all kind of got on with our lives after that, but I was still very shaken up. I slept with my lights on for more than a year, and I would always be awake past 3. I couldn't go to sleep anymore. The intruder they caught went to jail for only a year, as he was a first-time offender, and is now in a rehab program. He has sent us a letter or 2, with our consent, and we kind of feel bad for him. He was traumatized too, but half a year ago we heard that the second man was taken into custody, and I was finally over it. I mean, I wasn't as bad as at the beginning, but of course I still got scared sometimes. But now they'd finally caught the man that was in my room, and what we found out was unsettling to say the least. While the dude that pissed himself didn't have a record before this happened, the dude who was in my room was a very experienced criminal. He had multiple possession charges, theft, drink driving, and worst of all, assault and attempted homicide. The man I talked to, cursed out and pushed out of my room at 3 a.m, was dangerous, and I'm very happy to be alive. Hey there, it's me again, Miss Fearsome. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, then please hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me further, please check out my Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Also, check out my new YouTube membership levels for some exclusive perks. So until next time, stay happy, stay safe, and remember, keep being creepy.